You're watching Total Carp Fishing TV, and today you join me on the bank where we're checking out 4 different spod rods from the guys at Shimano. Now this is going to be a bit of a comparison review. It's going to be a little bit technical but also a little bit subjective, but basically, quite simply, we're going to be spodding at different distances, see how the different rods cope in those sorts of conditions, and then hopefully at the end I'll be able to give you a bit of a conclusion on what rod might be the best for you. So let's crack on. To start with, I've got a marker float set out over there at 60 yards, and we're going to run through each of the rods, fishing at that range. So the 4 different rods that we've got the cheapest in the range, which is the TX Spod. We've then got the TX Plus, the TX Extreme, and the TX Intensity. And these all come through at very different price points. So what we've got here is we've got an X Spod, which we've got loaded up with a mixture of particle and boilies. And I've quite simply completely taped that up with electrical tape. So that bait's not going to come out. We can keep on casting it and bringing it in, and that weight's going to stay roughly the same. I'll drain it out after each time so it doesn't build up any water inside, but that'll give us our casting weight and a nice accurate representation. We've also got several different spods and spoms, which we'll also try out, but to start off with, we're going to be using this, and we've got the marker float out there at 60 yards, so that should be a nice comfortable range for any rod. So let's crack on and see how we get on. Right, okay, so this one's the TX Spod. It's the cheapest rod in the range. And yeah, it's a reasonably nice rod. I can already tell it's got reasonably soft tip, but at this sort of range, that shouldn't be an issue and might actually be quite helpful. That sort of softer tip should keep it nice and accurate. There we go, that literally landed not even a yard away from the float. So that's beautiful. So skip her in. Give it a little empty out to get rid of that excess liquid. Keep the weight roughly the same. And with this sort of short range, I'm basically going to do a sort of traditional, starting with the rod forward, bring it back and go forward. At these sorts of short ranges, that's quite a comfortable way of spomming. There we go, that was literally not even a foot away, that was probably 6 inches from the marker. Bring it up onto the surface. So 2 for 2 there have been absolutely bang on. I'd be rubbing my hands together if I was in this sort of fishing situation. And I was spomming like that. Get a bit more there. Perfect. Oh, scared the grebe there. Wondering what was going on. One thing I have noticed about the rod, it's got this shrink wrapped handle, which for me, I do actually prefer a little bit of a thicker handle for a bit of extra grip. But it looks nice, and some people out there will be more than happy with that sort of handle. So for the price point on this, if I was fishing at these sorts of ranges for most of the time, to be honest, I don't think you need anything more. So let's get the reel changed over onto the other rods now and see how they fare at this sort of range. Right, okay, so we've got the next rod here, which is the TX Plus. Right, so this rod's basically, and all the rods in fact in the range, are designed to complement the normal rod range. And the TX Plus is designed to sort of complement the TX2s and the TX4s. And straight away, I can notice in my hand that it feels that little bit beefier, that bit stronger, but it's also a little bit lighter too in the tip from what it feels in my hand. As I said, that tip's definitely a little bit stiffer, and the handle's also got a little bit of a wider diameter, feels a little bit more comfortable in my hand. So I've got a feeling is that I'd sort of prefer this rod over the other one, personally, in my own fishing. So let's just crack on. I mean, straight away, I can feel that that's got a little bit more power in it. Definitely seems like it's got more power throughout the rod, and it just bounces back, snaps straight that little bit quicker as well. It feels a lot crisper in the hand. That was nice and accurate. No more so than the other one, but there's definitely a difference in feel even at this sort of range. Lovely and accurate still. And I would say it's a little bit nicer rod to use, just because it's got that bit more of a sort of crisp feel. I can already tell that it feels in your hand like there's a lot more backbone there, a lot more strength to come. So I imagine when we're spomming at 100 yards, that's going to make all the difference there. Right, okay, so here it is, the TX Extreme. First things first, this is the sort of rod that complements the TX5s and the TX7s. Now the TX7s are an incredible distance tool, and I think the TX Extreme is designed to sort of live up to that as well. First things you notice, again, even more so than the last one, it feels a little bit lighter, crisper and more powerful. Straight away you can tell that. It's got a really nice finish on the rod too, and again it's got an even thicker sort of full duplon butt section which complements that TX7 rod. Lovely, lovely feeling rod in the hand. So let's crack on. Lovely. Now straight away, that feels like it's got a much tippier action, which is basically coming down to the fact that you've got a lot more power in that bucket section. Sorry about that there. I was literally playing the spom as it went round the corner of the reeds, so almost lost my spom then. What I was saying is that there seems to be a lot more power and a lot more of a faster action on this, which I'd imagine will come into play when I'm spomming out at those longer ranges. So let's go again. Lovely and accurate. Now, when I was saying earlier that the tip felt stiffer, in the cast it doesn't necessarily feel too stiff at all, even at this sort of range. It's got plenty of flex in there in the tip, which means you can still stay nice and accurate at this sort of range. Lovely. Another thing that I noticed as well just there, and it might just be down to chance, but I'm thinking it's probably down to the faster action of the rod, is it just makes lifting that line up and getting the line off the water, dragging that spom up to the surface, that little bit quicker too. Right, we'll do one more and then move on to the final rod in the test. Well, you couldn't get much more accurate than that. I'm pretty sure that hit the float. Thankfully it didn't seem to break it. Yeah, very, very happy with that performance, I've got to say. So here we go, the final rod in the range. This is the TX Intensity. It's the most expensive rod in the range, and almost everything about it is completely different to the other rods. It feels quite soft in the tip, but having cast with the TX Ultra rods, which is based to sort of complement the TX Ultras and the TX 9s, they are very soft rods in the tip, but they're also, despite being quite slim, have got a huge amount of power. Now, with the actual fishing rods, I've been able to cast over 200 yards, so I'm no doubting that the TX Intensity spod rod, designed to complement that, will also be a very, very capable tool. Straight away, it's super, super lightweight, and I expect it's the sort of, using the best materials that they can, have been able to get around that compromise of having a soft tip, a really powerful butt, and also keeping it lightweight. So let's see how it gets on with the first few casts. Well, that was straight down the middle. That does the same for every cast. I think I'll be putting this back in my van. Really accurate again. That was literally, both of those have been within probably a foot of the marker float. Once again, absolutely bang on. And actually casting that, you can start to feel the difference in the action. Like I said, it's got quite a soft tip, and I think that helps retain the accuracy. But you also get a real sort of sense of power progression. It's not just brute force like you need on some spod rods. This has a real progression as you go through the cast. So you store that energy, and almost like an elastic band, it fires it back out straight towards the target. Let's keep on going. Literally hit the marker float again. It's also got a much thicker handle as well. It's got a full Duplon handle, apart from this little abbreviated bit at the top, but the handle itself is really quite beefy where you're holding it, and that gives you plenty of grip. And then it's got this CI4 sort of lightweight moulded handle, moulded reel seat rather, which is extremely ergonomic. It feels really nice in the hand. It almost feels too light and responsive to be a spod rod. But I guess we'll see when we get to the longer ranges. And that sort of brings us to the end of the first round, as it were. Fishing at 60 yards. Now, the first thing that I'll say is that all of the rods, all four of them, from the TX spod all the way through to the TX Intensity, they've all been perfectly capable. If you're not going to be fishing over 60 yards, then realistically, there's no major requirement for spending more than just the TX spod rod. Obviously, if you really like having the best of the best, then go ahead and purchase this. And it is a nicer rod to use. It's a little bit lighter, and well, it's quite a lot lighter actually. And you do get that sense of progression as you go up through the range. But my thinking is that these differences will become a lot more apparent when we're moving up to 100, 120 yards and above. So let's get this looped off, back onto the TX spod. We'll bring the marker in, wrap it up and get it back out there. Right, so we're back on the TX spod. I've just whacked that marker out at 25 wraps, 100 yards, and I've clipped this up at the same range too. So I'm going to change things up a little bit because it's actually a reasonable range now. I'm just going to start from back, step forward and transfer that across. wasn't too bad. Not too bad at all. It's probably 6 foot, 8 foot off the target, so I'm not complaining on that for a first cast of the rod at this sort of range. And again, that's one thing worth mentioning, is that accuracy will improve as well as you get used to a rod. So just chopping and changing between rods every 6 casts is probably not going to help massively, but it will give a decent comparison. Well, I think that actually hit the mark float. So TX spod is definitely capable of fishing up to 100 yards. And whilst it was, like I said, whilst you've still got that soft tip that I was saying about before, it doesn't quite have that sort of crispness, but still has plenty of power there for spomming at decent range. So yeah, I'm already quite impressed on how this is performing. Right, so TX Plus again. This is the second in the range that we're testing. Nice of that wind to pick up just before I start casting, but yeah, that was nice. Again, felt like plenty in reserve, but a noticeable difference between this and the last one is, again, fishing at this sort of range, just the use of the rod seems a little bit less sort of tiring, a little bit less fatigued. I think where it's a little bit lighter, a little bit crisper, got a bit of a quicker sort of action on it. Just feels all a bit nicer to use. Gosh, right next to the float. Now, I'd already say, I mean, I'm only a couple of casts in, so maybe I'll be speaking too soon, but from first impressions, if I was regularly fishing at around 100 yards, then I do personally prefer this. And it maybe seems a little bit more accurate even. I mean, you can't get much more accurate than that. Hopefully I don't bring the float in again. So yeah, as a whole, I'd probably say I was a little bit more accurate with this one, but the bigger difference, I would say, is just the sort of the ease of use, really. With it being that little bit stiffer, that little bit crisper, it definitely just makes it a little bit easier to use. Right, well, that last performance will be hard to beat, other than that one that went a little bit wayward, but that was probably down to me more than anything. But here goes with the TX Extreme. Well, first things first, I thought that the spod had emptied because that felt so much lighter casting it with this rod. And I think realistically, up until you get to the maximum ranges, that's probably what the biggest differences will be. If I can get out of reeds. That's what the biggest differences will be, is how it feels in your hand when you're casting. And they have got progressively more comfortable for casting at these sorts of ranges. Right, last cast. Lovely, absolutely effortless that. Effortless fishing at that sort of range. Nice and accurate. And most, like I said, the biggest difference is just how light and comfortable it is to actually cast with this rod in comparison. Right, now onto the final in this part, fishing at 100 yards. We've got the TX Intensity. Let's see how this one gets along. No problems whatsoever. How many spods can a man cast out before they call him Tom Maker? Once again, you get that same sense that that almost propels the spod forward. Like you're not putting as much effort into the cast, but you can almost feel that rod bucking in your hand and really propelling that spon, that ex-spod rather. Lovely and accurate. Right, so this is going to be the last one. If it's anything like the others, it should be pretty much a yard and a half from the marker float. Plenty close enough though when you're baiting up. And again, you get that same sense of, it's got a very different action to the other ones, with much more of a progressive sort of power in the cast. So that might suit some people more than others. And I certainly think that it makes it easier to compress this rod. If you're maybe not the best caster in the world, but you do need to fish at range, then you might actually find that this rod does help with that. But yeah, so far, so good for all of them really. So let's move up to the next distance, 120 yards. Right, okay, so we're on to 120 yards here. It's all wrapped up at 30 wraps. And to be honest, we've done away with the marker float itself. So I'm just going to pick a horizon marker out there to aim towards. A, I'm not really going to be able to see the marker float that well. And B, you're not going to be able to see the marker float that well. And C, I don't want to, if by chance I manage to get that accurate as I did on the 100 yard and the 60 yard, I don't want to be winding in a marker float from 120 yards. So we'll crack on without the marker float and I'll give you a sort of idea of how accurate I feel once I've done those few casts. Let's get all lined up. So I'm going to have a bit more of a step into this cast because obviously 120 yards is a fair old chuck. Let's go nice and straight. Yep, I'd be well happy with that if I was baiting up properly. That was pretty much bang on the target. Oh, that one didn't quite get to that range. There we go, that's not too bad. Thought I'd release that a little bit early, but it went out there all right. Now, I think that sort of, for me, I'll have to see how the other rods do in comparison. But I definitely feel like fishing and baiting at 120 yards with this rod with a large spod like an X spod is going to be quite hard work. And if that's the sort of range that you're going to be fishing at, you want to be able to be hitting that comfortably every time. We'll see how far I actually max out on it, where I'm really giving it my all. But for this, I'm really trying to see how accurately and how comfortably you can fish at those sorts of ranges. So we'll get it swapped over and compare how it does. Right, so here we go with the TX Plus. I'm expecting that this will be a bit more comfortable hitting those sorts of ranges. I have used this rod before as well for fishing at 120 yards, so I know it is perfectly capable of doing it. So let's give it a go. Absolutely bang on the money. If I was fishing tonight and I was actually spodding out bait, then I would be game on for some action. Again, I've said it, I know I've said it multiple times before, but the difference now you can actually feel in the cast at this sorts of range, but also just in the general use of the rod as well. It definitely feels a lot more comfortable, a lot lighter, and a lot easier to use at these sorts of ranges. Right, we'll do one final cast and then move on to the TX Extreme. Once again, very, very good in terms of accuracy, probably about 1.5 yards off the centre line. So if I was in a fishing situation, like I say, those 4 spoms, I'd be more than happy that I've got enough bait around my rig in just 4 casts. So I'm more than happy with that. Right, okay, so let's move on to the TX Extreme. Well, well, that was going to go 210 yards, but well, it's safe to say that distance isn't an issue for the TX Extreme. Oh my God. Oh my God. Look in the distance. Come on the spod. Come on the double spod. No oh my God. Well, that's quite unbelievable really. For those of you who weren't quite sure what was going on there, Joe decided to have a quick cast with the other rod just to see what it was like. Somehow managed to lose 23 wraps of line out in the lake when the braid got cut somehow, leaving the spom floating out there in the distance with all that braid. Somehow, on my next cast with this, I actually picked up the braid on the way in, and drag the whole lot back. So we didn't lose the X-spod, we didn't lose any of the braid, and Joe didn't lose his job. Right, I'll do one final cast. And Joe won't be having a go with this one. Lovely. Absolutely effortless. So yeah, if you're fishing at ranges around 120 yards, I can definitely say that the TX Extreme is an extremely capable tool. Okay, and so finally, back on the TX Intensity. Let's see how this one fares at 120 yards. Absolutely straight as die. Bang on. That was absolutely bang on the mark. Very little effort. And you just feel that real punch and that power progression in the rod, slinging that X-spod out there. It's almost scarily lightweight when you're going for the cast, but then you feel that power come through from the butt section. Right, so that was the last one with the TX Intensity. And between those four rods, it was easy to sort of see at this sort of range, 120 yards, the differences. They're really starting to sort of manifest themselves. The TX spod, it's capable of hitting those ranges, but it's going to take a lot more sort of work. It's a lot more tiring doing it. You then go up to the TX Plus, and that sort of takes that sort of range in its stride. The TX Extreme then takes it to another level, and I was literally hitting that range with minimal effort, meaning I could be really, really, really accurate. And then finally you've got the TX Intensity, which, like I say, is a completely different feel of rod. It feels very soft, but then you've got that power as it sort of transfers through the cast, and it's silly, silly lightweight as well. So if you can get past that sort of how lightweight it feels, and in the knowledge that, yeah, it's going to be able to cope with what you're doing, then it really is a lovely tool to use. So now in the final part of the test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reclip it at, say, 140, see if I can hit it there, and then if I can hit it at that range, I'm going to go a little bit further and a little bit further and see what sort of maximum ranges I can hit with each of the rods.
Yep.
Right, so I was able to hit the clip at 140 there pretty comfortably. So I've wrapped up at 160 now. I have swapped over onto a medium spom here, which you can see is all taped up as well, filled with particle. And that's just because I'll hopefully be able to just move that through the air a little bit quicker and generate a bit more speed. If I can hit it with this, I'll give it a go on the X-spod as well and see where we go from there. Well, that was pretty comfortable on the medium spom at 160, which really amazes me actually, because this is, like I say, this is the TX spod, and it almost seems like, now that I'm really, really stepping into it and really giving it some beans, it does have that backbone there, and it does have that capability. But it just seems to be more a case of you really need to give it some to unlock that sort of potential, really. Right, well, this is wrapped at 180 now. It's worth mentioning a couple of things. Firstly, we've got a bit of a sort of side to backwind at the moment, so that's going to be helping. But also dropping down to this medium spom is a bit more suitable for fishing at these long ranges. It just being a little bit lighter, it just makes it easier to generate that speed and hopefully get that distance. So here goes nothing. Well, there you go, that brings this test to an end. So I was actually able to hit between 170 and 180 yards with all 4 of the rods, which really sort of proves, I mean, there's not very many people out there that are going to be spomming at that sort of range, but it just proves that all of those rods are fully capable of putting bait at those sorts of extreme distances. Now, the TX spod, the cheapest in the range, that was probably the biggest surprise to me. Being able to hit that sort of range with such an affordable rod really does sort of shout about its sort of value for money, I guess. But there's without doubt that as you go up in price range, the actual usability, the comfort at fishing at that sort of range and spomming at that sort of range just becomes the whole process becomes a lot easier. So if you really don't have that much of a budget, then you can certainly get away with something like the TX spod, and that will cover pretty much any of your spodding needs. However, if you want something that's a bit lighter, a bit crisper, something that's a bit more comfortable to spod with, then there's no doubting that as you go up that range, that improvement in materials, in the way that the rods are built, all sort of transfer through to the user experience. So I hope this has helped you guys. And if you're in the market for a spod rod, then it's definitely well worth taking a look at the Shimano TX range, especially if you own the TX rods too and you can get a rod to match. Because who doesn't love a rod to match? So I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of comparison video. Like I say, it's a bit of a mixture of sort of quantitative information and also subjectively what I found. So if you want some more information on the particular rods themselves, as I've not gone into great detail on all of the sort of the tech spec, if you want that information, then you can check it out on either one of our reviews on our website or in the magazine, or you can check it out on the Shimano website, fish.shimano.com.